So, I was thinking the other day about how pretty much every romantic comedy ends.
Oh boy. Let me guess. The frantic sprint through the airport.
Yes, exactly, the airport sprint. Or, the big public declaration of love in the pouring rain. And then the music swells, they kiss, and boom, credits roll.
Happily ever after.
Right. But we are culturally conditioned by that, I think, to believe that happily ever after is an actual destination. Like it's a specific coordinate on your GPS. You get the dream job, or you buy the house, or you finally get the partner, and you just unlock this permanent state called happiness.
Yeah, psychologists actually have a term to that. It's called the arrival fallacy.
The arousal fallacy.
Right. It's this deeply ingrained belief that once you cross a certain threshold, all the daily struggles just vanish and your life satisfaction becomes permanent.
Which is wild because if life were a movie, the credits would eventually end. And that couple from the airport still has to figure out whose turn it is to empty the dishwasher on a random Tuesday.
And that dream job probably involves 3 hours of utterly pointless Zoom meetings every week.
Exactly. So for you listening out there, welcome to the Deep Dive Lab. Today we are digging into that exact disconnect between our Hollywood fantasy of arriving at happiness and the actual reality of the human brain. We are diving deep into the science of happiness, or, well, why scientists actually kind of hate that word.
We really do. Happiness is just too fluffy. It's
Yeah.
way too vague for a laboratory setting. You can't put good vibes in a centrifuge. So today, we're decoding this massive, exhaustive literature survey on what researchers call subjective well-being, or SWB.
Right. Our mission today is to get past the self-help quotes and look at the hard data. We're getting into the genetics of joy, the brain chemistry of why buying a jet ski feels amazing but doesn't actually last, and the specific habits that genuinely move the needle.
But to really set the stakes for this deep dive into the source material, we have to start with a classic study, one that basically ruined everyone's assumptions back in 1978.
Oh, the Brickman and Campbell study. This
Yeah.
is the lottery winner one, right?
That's the one. It is an absolute foundational text in this field. So Brickman and his team did something really interesting. They interviewed three distinct groups of people. First, major lottery winners, people who had just won massive, life-changing amounts of money.
Like the 1970s equivalent of hitting the Powerball.
Exactly. Then they had a control group, which was just randomly selected neighbors from the Illinois phone book.
Hmm.
And the third group consisted of accident victims who had recently suffered spinal cord injuries resulting in paraplegia or quadriplegia.
And the assumption going into this, obviously, is that the lottery winners are going to be scoring off the charts on the happiness scale, and the accident victims are going to be at the absolute rock bottom.
Completely logical assumption. But that is not what the data showed. When they asked these groups to rate their current happiness, the lottery winners were not significantly happier than the random people from the phone book.
Which is crazy to think about.
It is. The initial thrill of the windfall had just faded. But the most jarring finding was actually regarding the accident victims. While they were, as you would expect, less happy than the lottery winners, their scores were still above the midpoint of the scale.
Wow.
Yeah, they were not languishing in the basement of despair like society assumed they would be.
I recall reading in the survey that the researchers also looked at what they called mundane pleasures, like just eating breakfast or hearing a funny joke.
Yes, and that is the crucial detail here. The lottery winners actually reported enjoying those little everyday things less than the control group did, because their baseline for excitement had been blown out so incredibly high by winning millions of dollars, a good cup of coffee just didn't register on their radar anymore.
But for the accident victims,
For the accident victims, they derived immense pleasure from those small everyday moments.
it's kind of like a contrast effect, right? Like if you eat expensive caviar for every meal, a piece of toast is going to taste like cardboard. But if you've been through a major physical trauma, just sitting in the sun eating a piece of toast probably feels like a miracle.
Precisely. And this leads us to the first really big problem with how we culturally talk about happiness. We treat it like it's a single monolithic emotion, like a light switch that's either on or off. But the research, especially the work pioneered by Ed Diener,
The guy they call Dr. Happiness.
yes, Dr. Happiness, his work shows that subjective well-being is actually a lot more like a dashboard with moving parts.
I really like that dashboard analogy from the source material. So if you and I are trying to measure subjective well-being, what specific gauges are we looking at on this dashboard?
Diener broke it down into three distinct components. First, you have life satisfaction. This gauge is cognitive. It's a rational judgment call. If I ask you, is your life going according to plan, you take a step back and evaluate your career, your family, your social status.
Okay, so that's the thinking part of happiness. It's like looking at the odometer on the car and saying, I've got a 401k, I have a roof over my head, my kids are healthy, I'm doing okay.
Right. But then you have the affective gauges, which measure your mood in real time. There's positive affect, which is how often you feel joy, interest, alertness, and negative affect, which is how often you feel sadness, anger, or fear.
Like the speedometer and the tachometer.
Exactly. And here's the real nuance that trips people up. These gauges do not always move together. You can have very high life satisfaction, and your life is objectively good on paper, but you can have very low positive affect in a given moment because you're sleep deprived or dealing with a stressful deadline.
Oh, that completely explains the stressed parent paradox.
Yes, perfect example.
Because you ask a new parent, do you love being a dad? And they will immediately say, absolutely, it's the most meaningful thing in the world. That's their life satisfaction gauge. It's pegged to the max. But if you measure their actual mood at 3 in the morning, when the baby is screaming and they've slept 2 hours, their positive affect is practically 0.
Exactly. And mixing up those two gauges is where people get incredibly confused about what they actually want out of life. And this actually maps perfectly onto a philosophical debate that's been raging for over 2,000 years. Is the battle between hedonic and eudaimonic well-being.
Ah, right. This is the Aristotle versus Epicurus showdown.
In a nutshell, yes. So the hedonic approach is all about maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. It's very much the treat-yourself mentality.
Eat the cake, buy the shoes, get the massage.
Right. Good food, luxury, comfort. It aligns very closely with those affective mood gauges we just talked about.
And eudaimonic is the heavy hitter of the two.
It really is. Aristotle argued that true well-being doesn't come from just chasing pleasure. It comes from living in accordance with your true self, or your daemon. It's about virtue, meaning, and excellence. And the kicker is, it's not always fun.
Like training for a marathon, that is definitely not fun in the hedonic sense. It literally hurts. You get blisters, your muscles ache. You have to wake up at 5 a.m.
Yes, but it provides a massive eudaimonic payoff because it builds competence and a deep sense of meaning.
So if we look at modern psychology in the survey, specifically the work of Ryan and Deci on self-determination theory, they basically outline the engine requirements for that eudaimonic well-being. They argue you need 3 very specific fuels.
Yes, self-determination theory, or SDT, is huge here. They posit that all human beings have 3 innate psychological needs. First is autonomy. That's the feeling that you are the author of your own actions. Second is competence, the sense that you are good at what you do and can effectively master your environment. And third is relatedness, the fundamental need to feel connected to and cared for by other people.
I feel like a lack of autonomy is exactly why so many people are miserable at corporate jobs. You can pay someone a huge hedonic salary, give them great money, a ping pong table in the break room, free snacks.
The golden handcuffs.
Right. But if they are constantly micromanaged and have absolutely 0 control over how they spend their day, they burn out.
That is exactly what the data predicts. You simply cannot buy off the psychological need for autonomy with hedonic rewards. It doesn't balance the equation.
Okay, so we've got the dashboard concept, we have the philosophy of meaning versus pleasure, but I really want to talk about the actual hardware, because I'm sure you know people, I definitely know people, who just seem to have a happiness advantage built into their DNA.
Natural optimists.
Yeah, they walk into a room and they're just lighter, things roll off their backs easier. So how much of this dashboard is just hardwired from birth?
This is where we have to look at twin studies. The literature survey highlights a major meta-analysis by Bartels that looked at thousands of twins to separate nature from nurture. And the scientific consensus right now is that genetics account for about 30 to 40% of the variance in subjective well-being.
40%. I mean, that is a serious chunk of the pie.
It is substantial. But we have to be really careful not to view this as some magical happiness gene. It's a polygenic trait, meaning it's a mix of many tiny genetic effects, and it's actually driven heavily by personality. Subjective well-being is very strongly correlated with the big 5 personality traits, specifically a combination of high extroversion and low neuroticism.
Which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. If you're high in extroversion, you get a bigger dopamine hit from social rewards. You are literally chemically wired to enjoy a crowded party more than someone else might.
Exactly.
And if you're high in neuroticism, your brain is just more sensitive to threats and negative emotions. You're scanning for danger.
Correct. But here's where the science gets really interesting. It's not just that your genes inject you with happy chemicals directly. It's a phenomenon called gene-environment correlation. Your genes heavily influence the environments you actively choose to put yourself in.
Oh, I see.
So an extrovert naturally seeks out social gatherings, which in turn boosts their happiness dashboard. A highly neurotic person might actively isolate themselves to avoid potential stress, which unfortunately lowers their overall happiness by cutting off that relatedness need we talked about.
So the genes are basically steering the ship towards certain islands. We aren't just passive recipients of biology. Our biology drives us to build lives that reinforce our natural baseline.
That is a fantastic way to put it.
Yeah.
And it really explains why our happiness set point feels so incredibly stable over time. But, and this is a huge, but for anyone listening who feels stuck, it is not immovable. Remember, 60 to 70% is still environment and choices.
Which brings us right back to the treadmill concept. We mentioned the Brickman lottery study earlier, this idea of adaptation, the theory that we have a set point and we always snap back to it like a rubber band.
Yes, the hedonic treadmill.
Yeah.
For a very long time in psychology, this was the dominant, slightly depressing theory. You get a promotion, you're thrilled for a month, and then you adapt. You get fired, you're devastated for a month, and then you adapt.
But newer research by Diener, Lucas, and Scullin challenged the absoluteness of that treadmill, didn't they?
They did. They found that while human adaptation is an incredibly powerful force, it is not perfect.
They found that something like 20 to 25% of people actually managed to shift their baseline happiness significantly over the long term. They didn't just snap back to the start.
Exactly. The rubber band can actually be stretched permanently. So the obvious million-dollar question became, what are those 25% doing differently than the rest of us? And this is where Sanja Lubomirski's sustainable happiness model comes in. She makes a critical distinction between life circumstances and intentional activities.
Okay, so circumstances are the nouns in our lives. The house, the car, the salary, the city we live in.
Right. And the data shows we adapt to circumstances incredibly fast. It's a process called habituation. The human brain is an ultimate efficiency machine. It literally stops noticing things that don't change. You buy a new couch, it's great for a week, and then it just becomes background furniture.
But intentional activities, those are the verbs.
Yes, the verbs are different.
Because verbs are dynamic. If you're learning to play the guitar, the challenge changes every single week. If you're volunteering at an animal shelter, the interactions with the dogs or the staff are different every time you go. You can't really habituate to something that keeps evolving.
Exactly. Intentional activities provide a constant stream of fresh, novel experiences that essentially prevents the hedonic treadmill from catching up with you. So if you want to be in that 25% who permanently shift their baseline, you have to invest your energy in verbs, not nouns.
Speaking of nouns, though, we really have to address the giant elephant in the room when it comes to happiness: money.
Ah, yes.
Because there is so much conflicting information out there. You hear the old cliche, money doesn't buy happiness, but then you hear, actually, it does buy happiness up to $75,000. And then you see billionaires who seem completely miserable and others who seem pretty cheerful.
The relationship between income and subjective well-being is, without a doubt, one of the most heavily studied and debated areas in the entire field. And it brings us to a really fascinating concept called the Easterlin paradox.
Okay, lay it on us.
So Richard Easterlin noticed a major contradiction in the data. If you look at people within a single country at a specific moment in time, say, the U.S. right now, rich people are consistently and measurably happier than poor people.
Which totally makes sense. Poverty is incredibly stressful. Having money solves a massive amount of low-level daily misery. You don't have to worry about the grocery bill or fixing the car.
Right. It buys you a baseline of security. But here's the paradox. If you look at that country as a whole over a long period of time, as the entire nation gets richer, the average happiness of the citizens doesn't budge. The U.S. gross domestic product has skyrocketed over the last 50 years. We have smartphones, we have better healthcare, we have air conditioning everywhere. But our average life satisfaction score is completely flat.
So wait, if I get richer individually, I get happier. But if we all get richer together, nobody gets happier.
Exactly. And the reason why is social comparison. We don't evaluate our lives in an absolute vacuum. We evaluate our lives relative to our peers. If my income doubles, I feel great. But if my income doubles and your income also doubles, my relative status hasn't changed at all. I'm still in the exact same place in the social pecking order.
Oh, it's the classic keeping up with the Joneses effect, but it's fundamentally hardwired into our cognitive evaluation gauge.
It really is. However, we do have to zoom out a bit. If we look at the World Happiness Report, which ranks entirely different nations against each other, we see massive differences in baseline happiness between countries.
Right. It's always the Nordic countries flexing at the top. Finland, Denmark, Iceland, they always win.
They consistently dominate the top tier. And it is not just because they are wealthy nations.
Right, because I was looking at the breakdown of the World Happiness Report data in the survey, and the correlation with trust is just massive. It's not just the saunas and the healthcare.
Trust is the secret ingredient. Trust and robust social support. In those top-ranking Nordic countries, if you survey people and ask, hey, if you lost your wallet with all your cash in it, do you think a police officer or a random neighbor would return it to you? They overwhelmingly say yes.
That is incredible to think about. That creates a profound psychological safety net.
It reduces the baseline cognitive load of daily life. You aren't walking around defensively all the time. You feel intrinsically supported by the tribe, so to speak.
Which segues perfectly into what I think is the most important part of this entire deep dive. Because if you strip away the money and you strip away the genetic lottery and the hedonic treadmill, the survey identifies one thing as the absolute strongest predictor of subjective well-being.
Yes. Social connection.
Connection is king.
It really is. Humans are obligate social animals. We evolved to survive in groups. Prolonged isolation is biologically toxic to our systems. The quality of your relationships, and to be clear, we mean the depth of those relationships, not the quantity of your Instagram followers, is the true engine of well-being.
And I want to emphasize for the listener that this isn't just, the power of friendship sentimentality from a greeting card. There is hard neuroscience backing this up. The survey mentioned a fascinating fMRI study involving spending money.
Yes, this is one of my favorite studies.
Yeah.
It was conducted by Elizabeth Dunn and her colleagues. They put participants inside an fMRI scanner so they could watch their brain activity in real time, and they gave them money. In one experimental condition, the participants were told to spend the money on themselves. In the other condition, they were instructed to donate it or spend it on someone else.
And the rational, cold, economic part of our brain should say, well, spending the money on me is clearly better because I get to keep the physical resources.
That is exactly what classical economic theory would predict. But the human brain heavily disagreed. The scans showed that when people spent money on others, a region called the ventral striatum lit up far more intensely than when they bought something for themselves.
And the ventral striatum, that's a major part of the brain's reward system, right? The dopamine center.
It's a critical node in the reward prediction network, yes. But what is truly fascinating here is the interplay of different neurochemicals. Seeking status or buying consumer stuff primarily hits the dopamine system. And dopamine is all about wanting and anticipation. It's the thrill of the hunt.
The rush of ordering something online, but then you don't really care when the Amazon box actually arrives.
Exactly. But connection, generosity, and pro-social behavior trigger the oxytocin and serotonin systems. And those chemicals are about bonding, safety, and deep contentment.
So it's almost like dopamine is the gas pedal that screams, go get the thing, keep moving. But serotonin and oxytocin are the brakes that actually allow you to stop and enjoy the ride.
That is a brilliant analogy. And the core problem we face today is that modern society, and specifically the attention economy, is engineered to constantly redline our dopamine system. We are perpetually wanting the next phone, the next notification, the next purchase. We are over-indexing on the gas pedal and completely ignoring the oil change.
Which perfectly explains the paradox of pursuit mentioned in the literature. There are studies suggesting that people who actively and consciously pursue happiness as a goal, like they wake up and say, I'm going to make myself happy today, actually end up measurably less happy.
Yes, and that is specifically prevalent in highly individualistic cultures like the U.S. Because when you aggressively focus on my happiness, you are hyper-focusing on the self. You start constantly monitoring your own mood, which ironically creates anxiety. You're asking yourself, am I happy yet? How about now? Is this working? It inherently isolates you from the present moment and from others.
Whereas if you take the eudaimonic approach, so you wake up and think, I'm going to go help my friend move furniture today, you aren't thinking about your own happiness at all. You're just thinking about how heavy that couch is and how to get it through the door.
Right.
But the happiness comes in through the back door as a natural byproduct of the shared struggle and the connection.
Exactly. There's an old saying that happiness is like a shy bird. If you run directly at it trying to catch it, it just flies away. But if you sit quietly and focus on doing your work, it might just land on your shoulder.
I love that. So we have unpacked a massive amount of material here. We've gone through Diener's dashboard, the genetic lottery, the hedonic treadmill, and the neuroscience of generosity. If we have to distill this exhaustive literature survey into a few core, actionable takeaways for the listener, what are the big ones?
I would boil it down to three main pillars. First, diversify your portfolio.
Okay, explain that.
Just as a financial advisor would tell you never to put all your money into one single stock, you shouldn't put all your well-being into one basket. You absolutely need both hedonic pleasure, savor the good coffee, enjoy a lazy Sunday, and you need eudaimonic meaning, which means doing difficult, purposeful work. If you only focus on one, the psychological system creates friction.
Right. Don't be a total martyr who never enjoys life, but also don't be a pure hedonist chasing the next thrill. You have to balance the mood gauge with the life satisfaction gauge.
Precisely. The second pillar is invest in verbs, not nouns. If you want to beat the habituation of the hedonic treadmill, you have to focus on intentional activities and ongoing experiences rather than static circumstances. Learn a new language, join a local hiking group, start a complex garden. Things that require sustained effort and attention don't just fade into the background the way a new car does.
Verbs over nouns. I really like that. And the third pillar?
The third is simply other people matter. That is actually a direct quote from Chris Peterson, who was one of the founding fathers of positive psychology. When he was asked to summarize the entire field's findings in just 3 words, he said, other people matter. If you want to hack your ventral striatum and permanently boost your baseline, the most chemically efficient way to do it is through pro-social behavior. Deep connection, expressing gratitude, and genuine generosity.
It's kind of ironic, really. We started our time in the lab today talking about the arrival fallacy, the Hollywood idea that you can win the game of life, cross the finish line, and just stop. But the science clearly suggests that happiness is actually a byproduct of active participation. It's found in the doing, and very specifically the doing with other people.
It implies that humans simply are not designed for leisure in the sense of doing absolutely nothing. We are fundamentally designed for engagement. Think back to the accident victims in the Brickman study. They found real joy in the active engagement of small daily moments. Meanwhile, the unhappy millionaires often found profound boredom in having an abundance of everything without having to strive for it.
That is a really powerful place to land. It completely shifts the question we ask ourselves from what can I get to be happy to what can I do to be happy?
And crucially, who can I be happy with?
Exactly. Well, this has been an absolutely fascinating look under the hood. It's actually comforting in a weird way to know that the brain's quirks, like the treadmill effect and habituation, are universal human features, not personal bugs that mean we're failing at life.
We are all running on the exact same evolutionary hardware. We just have to read the manual and learn how to operate it a bit better.
Absolutely. Thank you to everyone out there for stopping by the Deep Dive Lab today. If this conversation sparks some eudaimonic joy for you, or hey, even just some hedonic entertainment, please hit that subscribe button. We are constantly digging through the academic stacks to bring you these kinds of insights.
And as a practical takeaway, maybe text a friend today. Just check in on them. As we learned, it's literally good for your ventral striatum.
There you go. The science says. Text your friends. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. If your happiness set point is partially dictated by genetics, but also heavily shaped by the verbs you choose every single day, are you just running blindly on a hedonic treadmill of your own making? Or are you actively choosing to move forward? Until next time, take care of your dashboard.